From Lexington to Yorktown, the Revolutionary War and how it granted some Americans their own rights and responsibilities. The American Revolution established the United States as a sovereign nation, granting white colonists the rights of citizenship in a new republic. However, it failed to extend these freedoms to people of color who remained enslaved and oppressed, highlighting the irresponsibility of new leaders in upholding the promise of equality and representation outlined in the Constitution's ideals that all men are created equal. The American Revolutionary War had many leaders, and they changed quite frequently in the British Army, but the American leaders stayed the same, as George Washington, who died at the age of 67 during the winter of 1799. He became the first president of the United States after the Revolutionary War. General William Howe was one of the first and most notable military leaders for the British, and he was sympathetic towards the Americans. He was called back to London, though, in 1778 and was replaced by Sir Henry Clinton. Sir Henry Clinton was born and raised in New York and served under Thomas Gage and William Howe in 1775. His dad, the governor of New York from 1743 to 1753, also became the vice president under President John Adams. At this time, slavery was a serious problem, and most of the slaves were black because white people thought black people were lesser. What started all this was the Townshend Act. That was an act that raised taxes on tea, glass, and paint due to the high cost of the French and Indian War, and they had to make that money back somehow. This affects colonists' rights and responsibilities by making them pay absurd taxes and not have as much money. The colonists were the main targets of this act, and they didn't get a say in this and did not like that. This resulted in the Boston Massacre and Boston Tea Party. The Boston Massacre was an event in which the British soldiers fired upon colonist civilians for protesting against Parliament, and 5 of the civilians died. The Boston Tea Party was an event where a group of colonialists dressed up as Native Americans and snuck on board a ship carrying tea and threw it into the ocean. This sparked the beginning of the American Revolution. Now, although the Boston Tea Party marked the beginning of the Revolution, war did not officially break out until a few hours after Paul Revere's ride in 1775, which warned people about the British sending soldiers to arrest 2 outspoken leaders of the American Revolution, Sam Adams and John Hancock. The battles at Lexington and Concord on April 19, 1775, were the first battles of the American Revolution. Known as the shots heard around the world, the fight at Concord killed several and even more wounded badly. Of all the 4,000 people on the American side, there were only 11 recorded soldiers of color. Of the 1,500 British soldiers that engaged in the battle, only 1,200 made it out unscathed. His forces faced very few casualties due to the knowledge of what was actually going on. Battle of Bunker Hill on June 17, 1775 was the next key battle of the American Revolution that resulted in an American defeat, but it put fear in the British because they realized they were facing an actual unified army. Despite the British winning, they suffered considerably more casualties than the Americans. This is significant as it caused the British to evacuate to Boston. The most key battles, however, were the 2 battles of Saratoga, one at Freeman's Farm and the other at Bemis Heights. These were key battles because they were what caused the major defeat for the British. The British hoped to cut off supply lines and reinforcements for the Americans at the Hudson River, but 2 of the 3 British leaders failed to make it, leaving General John Burgoyne of the British to face off against General Horatio Gates' army. The First Battle of Saratoga at British loyalist John Freeman's Farm, which resulted in the British retreating and the American losing the field but suffered considerably less casualties. Eventually, when running low on supplies, Burgoyne sent a reconnaissance force to attack the American camp from one of their flanks. But when Gates got wind of this, there was a fight in an area known as Bemis Heights, and after 2 days of fighting, Burgoyne surrendered. This was when Parliament was really trembling in their boots because now the Americans had gotten the French to join the war on their side, and it got Great Britain to get rid of the act that started the war in the first place, and they made it so that they couldn't tax the colonies without their consent. Following the battles, General Henry Clinton replaced General William Howe, who moved his troops south towards the southern colonies, where there were more British loyalists. He captured Savannah, Georgia, and later Charleston, South Carolina. General Clinton dispatched General Charles Cornwallis to go to Virginia and set up a base in Yorktown. But George Washington troops, at this time having between 5,000 and 8,000 soldiers of color valiantly fighting for their freedom, approached his Yorktown encampment and laid siege on them until eventually Cornwallis' men surrendered. Word of Cornwallis's surrender reached Parliament on February 27th, and they stopped all offensive operations. On April 11th, 1783, Congress declared the war officially at an end, and the colonies had their own country they named the United States of America. Although assisting in beating the British in hopes of being free people, the soldiers of color were forced to remain slavery, even though the war would have gone longer if black soldiers had not helped the colonists. The short-term impact is that there were some rebellions by the British loyalists against the new regime. A short-term impact would be the fact that their taxes were lower, but that would have to change due to the cost of the Louisiana Purchase and other things. The long-term impacts impacted almost the whole world. The British lost 13 colonies, and the colonists' new nation thrived and grew to what it is today, and there were no more oppressive taxes imposed on them by the British. The U.S. gaining their independence was a pivotal point in history as it got rid of the absurd tax laws put upon them and changed things for citizens, but the people of color were still oppressed and in slavery. And the people, enticed by the promise of self-government, were disappointed when they only got to choose who was in charge. The U.S. was brave. They stood up for what they believed in and influenced other countries to do what it did. We fought against an unjust rule to protect the rights of the people, and we won. Thank you.